Good evening and welcome to the Laughing Monkey Music Show. Today we have on Steve Kilbey. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right.
Steve, we know Steve from the church. The easy thing you would know him is from Under the Milky Way. We all know that song, the haunting song, beautiful. But you guys are celebrating what 40 years now? Is it a little over 40
40,
years, right?
42 years.
42 years. That's insane.
I'm I'm celebrating 42 years of being in my band, but unfortunately, all the other members that started with me are no longer there.
Yeah, you're supposed to say I'm celebrating 42 years, but magically I'm only 56.
Yeah,
I don't know how you did that.
yeah.
That's amazing. You started so young. Um, with the sound that you guys came up with, I mean, was it influenced from the outside of other bands, or was it a sound you created? Because in the '70s, I can't think of a lot of bands that had that dreamy psychedelic sound. I mean, similar artists, but you guys kind of honed in to your own sound from the very beginning. It wasn't like you had albums that
We
didn't
did.
sound the same.
We did. We were very lucky. We had good players. Peter Koppers already had his sort of thing going with his echo and his chorus pedal, and he had a very distinctive way of playing. I've been playing with him before, and I've been struggling to for a long time to write some decent songs, and I really applied myself. And when we kicked off, we already had I did have a bunch of decent songs. Peter was did have his distinctive sound, and then Marty Wilson Piper joined, and by our second album, we really just completely lucked into our own sound. And we had a great producer in Bob Clearmountain who did the second album, The Blur
Yeah,
Crusade. And it was, we immediately could see how we should sound. And it's really hard because, the hardest thing in rock and roll is to have your own sound.
yeah,
I mean, it's much easier to be a really good player. And I know an endless amount of people who are better players than I am and can play more instruments and all that things. But none of them, the thing about the church, we immediately sort of could see how we should be, and we sort of stuck to that. And
yeah.
I think it's part luck and part just having the right people at the right time.
One of the things I didn't know when you guys first started off, how long were you together? And did you guys before you got a deal? And did you guys do any cover songs and stuff? Because I'm always interested. Because usually when a band starts messing around, and that always helps with the sound. Did you guys even do any other music before, or did you just do originals right out of the gate?
We well, the one part of the story that's quite important was that in 1977, TIAC released the first home recording setup. Before that, it was very hard to um, to do home recording.
Hmm.
You would have needed this great big machine, and there were guys in white coats. You know how you see the Beatles,
Yeah,
it used to be, and you need a lot of equipment and a lot of sort of know-how. TIAC made that really easy for people by releasing a domestic four-track machine, and so when that came out, I started to learn how to write songs like myself, because I could never writing a song on an acoustic guitar and then getting a band to translate it into rock and roll never sort of really worked out for me. But when I could write a bunch of songs on the TIAC and then give it to them, and it was all kind of finished, I sort of moved closer, much closer to doing what I wanted to do. So when the church got together, we didn't do any covers, and we had a whole bunch of songs I'd written. And then when the band got a little bit good, we did our own recording on the four-track machine, which produced some very superior demos. Because it's hard to imagine, but back in 1980, it was very hard to get control of what you wanted to do. You go in the
hmm,
studio, and there'd be all these guys, the engineers and producers, or whoever was running the show, would always try and talk you out of doing whatever it was that you wanted to do. And they would always have a better idea of how you should do it. And so we made our own demos, and the first record company we took it into, which was this guy who'd reactivated Parlophone and Northern Songs for EMI Records here. The
Mhm.
first guy who heard it. The legend is I wasn't there. I didn't take the tape in. Peter did, took a cassette in, and the guy said, "Oh, I'm too busy to hear it. Just leave it here with my secretary." And then the second in charge came out and said, "I'll have a listen." So Peter went into his office with him and he put it on. And as he started liking it, he turned it up more and more until eventually the big head honcho ran in and said, "What is this? What is this?" And we said, "It's the church." And we got a deal. It was a bad deal, but we immediately got a deal. And we immediately, by having a deal, it means we could be on the circuit.
Yep.
Like we could, and we had he bought us some new equipment. And we immediately had this kind of, we were legitimized,
Right.
and
Like
we got an
credit.
agent. We had an agent, we had a tour manager, and all of this kind of thing. And no, we didn't do any covers. We didn't play any covers at that stage. We were like just doing our own songs, and we had a lot of our own songs.
Well, that's probably why you've
So
had such a great sound that you've always been your own. Because I know a lot of rock bands that did covers. You can kind of hear their covers in them, and over the years they evolve into their own sound. You guys didn't have that in your way. You just were yourselves from the gate, you know. So there was no looking back and saying, "Oh, I was influenced here." Your first album, doesn't go far from anywhere else. You know what I mean? It's you guys. I mean, obviously
yeah,
there's song growth, of course, and we learn our instruments and production and that kind of changes, but the core of who you are has always been there.
yeah. Um, we it seemed like we formed fully formed, like Athena springing from Zeus's forehead. And but there have been a lot of me spending like 3 or 4 years just working on all the songs. Like
Mhm.
really, no, we didn't have any covers. I'm struggling to think when we start. I think um, once we were well established, we dabbled a little bit doing covers. We did
Yep.
easy covers that weren't very hard to learn. Like we did a song by Mark Bolan called Desdemona, which was his song he did in John's Children. We did It's All Too Much by the Beatles. Um, but we didn't, because I had written so many songs, and
Hmm.
we had it was sort of, it just didn't feel necessary to do those covers.
Was it a
And
challenge though, being a new band with original music and playing out to the audiences though back then? Like I don't know what the
it,
scene was
it
back then.
It was, well, in Australia we had the famous pub rock scene where pub rock had exploded, and every bar in Sydney had a band playing there. It was like a legendary golden time that people speak about.
Yeah.
I still do interviews and people go, "Tell me, what was it like, during the pub rock explosion in Sydney?" And it's sort of like it's like the the Big Bang, where it all started. It sort of came along. Australia had was struggling a bit in the late 70s with the sort of, I think everything had kind of run out of momentum a bit. And then there was
Right.
this explosion, and all these bands poured forth. In that way, it was good and it was easy and it was good to be part of that. In another way, the music that was sort of being successful was like bluesy rock and roll, AC/DC
Hmm.
kind of. There's a lot of that jig 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 jig. My baby got a rock and roll. There's a lot of that kind of shouting and screaming and sweating, and the church were really the opposite of that, which was a good thing because it gave us something to rebel against as well. It gave us I think it's always good. To have something that you don't want to be, and go, we're not going to be like that, we're going to be something else.
Right.
And for a little while before we got our first sort of hit single, which was with our second song. um there was a TV show in Australia called Countdown, and in 1980, and this show had been an institution for a long time, and in 1980, there were no other video shows. There were
Hmm.
no shows that had bands or no shows to play video or anything. And we got on that show because we're on EMI. They got us on this show, and we played Unguarded Moment, and it kind of took off. It was quite one of those rags to riches sort of stories, where one day the day before the show, we were playing to nobody, and the day after the show, there were 900 people at the gig.
Wow.
That literally happened, and then that was it. Then we sort of, people who were coming to see us sort of knew what they were going to get. So we we'd done a lot of that hard bit, you know, like where, you know, people weren't coming along and yelling out for us to play AC/DC songs. Mind you, you know, the people who were yelling out for AC/DC, one imagines that they were at AC/DC shows when AC/DC first started yelling out for something else.
Probably.
No matter what you do, there's always somebody there heckling you and sort of wanting something else. So yeah, so in mid 1981, this song got played on Countdown. It was an immediate hit, and we sort of immediately we were doing very well in the big cities, but we didn't translate so well in the country areas,
Hmm.
and the sort of the further you got away from Sydney and Melbourne, the less
You were
friendly
known.
the audience were towards us. They didn't really like our big city sort of shtick. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah,
So
it was very different from what rock and roll, you know, from what the rock and roll everybody knows. It was much more dreamy, and the sounds were, you know, ethereal, and they were just, you know, so different. You know, you guys were such a different sound.
yeah, well, not everybody liked that different sound. They still don't. And there are a lot of amusing. You know, it's funny. I have a memory for all the sort of things that happened in the early days. For example, playing some godforsaken town in Western Australia, and this woman yelling out, "You're not worth $7." And I said, "If you don't like it, madam, you should leave." And she went, "I can't. I've spent too much money." And sort of like, another time, I got really tired of Unguarded Moment and having to play it, and the sort of the silliness that we had. We had so many songs. They pretty much all sort of sounded much of a muchness. It was crazy that you would love Unguarded Moment but didn't like the song that came before or after that. It was like I remember one night we did a gig, and I said, we're not going to play Unguarded Moment. And when we finished, we left the stage, and there was this awful commotion going on downstairs. And the manager came up the stairs to the dressing room, and he said, "I don't know what they want, but you better fucking go out there and play it, mate. You better go out there and play it." So we went down, and played it, and sort of the riot was nipped
Put
in the
down.
bud. But yeah,
That's interesting. Actually, that's a real good question. I mean, you have so much music. As we're talking about, you're getting ready to release your 26th album. You know, and
yeah,
I know a lot of your albums. I couldn't name everything on top of my head, but like when I listen to your albums, even if it's an easy one, like people would say Starfish, but any of your albums in the past couple of years, they're solid albums, and you can just put it on and just listen to the whole thing. You really can't tell the difference. You're not, to me, you're not a singles band. It's a whole album when I put it on, and that's what I like about your band. I can put it on and not have to worry about skipping songs. It's, you know, it's an atmosphere, it's a mood. You know,
that, that's the way I saw it. It's like, if you like Unguarded Moment, you like, especially at that stage, you know, like we had Unguarded Moment and 10 little Unguarded Moments. Um, I even started joking around. We were doing this gig in a place called Wollongong in 1981, and the audience, they were like pinned against the back wall, and they
okay,
wouldn't come anywhere near us. And I said, this next song we're about to play is based on an ancient Assyrian goat melody, where the shepherd would play or the goat herd would play this melody, and the sheep and the goats would come home immediately as soon as they heard it. And the audience are like looking at me, and then we start up the da da da. And fair enough, sure enough, they all came forward, and then as soon as it was, with no sense of irony, and then as soon as it was over, they were like sucked to the back wall again. You know, it was like,
Oh, that's
it
funny.
was
It's well played.
incredible. It was, yeah, but they didn't even think about it. It was,
I know.
um,
It makes it even funnier.
yeah, yeah. So I became sort of resentful, even though I should have been grateful. I was resentful that this one song seemed to have so much
Little did
sort
you
of
know, right?
clout.
That was going to
Yeah,
get bigger songs, right?
yeah, there was more to come.
How did you deal with that though? Because I mean, the one thing with the biggest Under the Milky Way is it does having a little more of a sweeping chorus, and I just think that's because the production pushes it out there a little bit more. It's still the same type of songwriting. It's just I think the production makes it go a little bit more out there and a little more poppier. I mean, that's just my take on it when I listen to it. Because like
Yeah,
Reptile's my favorite. It's like one of my favorite, and it's full of it's all the nuances of your music. You have to listen to it like a few times to really get it. You can't be like, rocking out to it. You have to listen to it a few times and absorb it, and then you becomes a part of you.
yeah. Well, within the sort of the cartoon medium of rock and roll, we are one of the more thoughtful bands that, we have, we're not, it's not all sort of screaming, and
Right.
it's, you know, it's, it's got a little bit more to it than that. It's not fucking Shakespeare, but it's designed for a more thoughtful experience. There's a slogan,
Like the
a more thoughtful experience. Try the church.
like the cool after party, which you guys are.
What's that?
You guys are like the cool after party.
Yeah,
So,
the cool after party.
you know, you can like chill back a little bit and still listen to it, and kind of it's an atmosphere, it's a vibe, it's a sound.
Exactly, exactly.
That's when I put you on. That's how I listen to all types of music. It depends on my mood, and when I'm, that's good music to be listened to when I'm doing stuff. It's just a good
Yeah,
vibe. It's just there. It absorbs the atmosphere.
I I think it's because I grew up. I was in the right place at the right time growing up, and the Beatles, of course, dominated everything. And very rapidly, the Beatles shed the thing they started with, and for a while there, everything they did was like this wonderful new
Yeah.
experiment in sound, and the lyrics were, they were challenging and thought provoking, and suddenly these guys were coming from a different place where nobody had come from before. Like John Lennon was sort of singing from this place of alien, with Strawberry Fields. He was
Right.
singing a song. It sounds like he's coming from a million miles away,
All
and
kinds of
he's singing
effects.
about,
Yeah.
yeah, but he's detached. Yeah, it sounds like he's singing from a telephone from a million miles away, and
Yeah.
he's, all of the, you know, that's the sunshine. It's all gone away, and it's a guy going, you know, um, you know, there's no one in my tree. I guess it must be I. And suddenly you've got someone who's very unsure of themselves, doesn't really know what's happening, and when all of this when they started experimenting, and the other bands were experimenting, and this sort of really lovely golden age of where singles were art.
Right.
You could turn on the radio, and if you were turning on the radio in 1967, you heard Strawberry Fields Forever. You were hearing as not only a hit single and damn catchy, wonderful song, but a work of sonic art that I would still boldly say rivals anything that anybody ever did, including whoever you like. Your Bach or your Louis Armstrong or whoever the hell you think was a great and wonderful, innovative musician. In my opinion, I put Strawberry Fields Forever, for example, down there as like the day things changed. So it's very, very. I always thought that sort of music and the lyrics especially. We used to have a lot of arguments over this in the church. Some of the other guys would try and get me to listen to stuff, and there'd be a singer over the top going, I'd be like, I can't listen to that with that guy doing that, singing like that, singing all this stuff. And they go, oh, just ignore the singer and just listen to what the guitars are doing. But I couldn't ignore the singer. I was spoiled by this stage. I wanted to hear something sort of clever or profound or magical, spiritual, in the lyrics. And I think growing up with the Beatles, them constantly setting that bar with each song, each album, each thing that they were doing. And then, of course, Mark Bolan, T-Rex, and David Bowie came along. And I had this really high standard of what I thought a song should do. And I ended up hating a lot of stuff, and sort of as I was saying before, the stuff I hated was guiding me as much as the stuff I loved. In that I would hear something absolutely terrible and go, I have to make a note of everything that's going on in this, so I won't be like that. So yeah, I'm not it's not easy to please me with music, but the things I love with an unbridled passion.
Yeah.
I do love music. I do love rock and roll, and those things that manage to pull it off, the thing that I'm looking for, makes me happier than anything else, any other sort of entertainment could possibly do. It's left me very dissatisfied with sort of, I don't know, Guns and Roses and stuff like that, which is just the same old slop, sort of regurgitated, um, over and over. I don't like that sort of
Right.
lead singer, the lead singer,
Axel.
like Axel, or I'll get myself in a lot of trouble if I keep going. But all of those lead singer types are like, "Little girl, I love you so." I'm like, no, that doesn't do it for me. I want something a bit more profound than that. But so that was easy because my parameters were, this point I keep on making over and over. My parameters were defined as much by what I hated as by what I loved.
That's fair enough. Fair enough. Enough.
Different stuff. So for me, depends on where my head's at in that day and that
music. I can appreciate a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
What about what about Queen at the time? If we're talking about
Queen,
rock. Yeah.
The band Queen.
Yeah.
Okay. I loved Queen. And he was a bit like that. He was a bit of a lead singer, but they had, of course, like everybody else, I thought Bohemian Rhapsody was an absolute masterpiece.
Absolutely.
And Brian May's guitar playing. I really like Queen. I went off them in the later days as when they were doing another one, Bites of Dust and stuff like that. But no, I really like Queen, and I really like Freddie. And I was right from the go. I had their first album. They had that marvelous song, "Liar, I have sailed the sea, liar, from Mars to Mercury." I love stuff like that. I thought Freddie was pretty wonderful. And I remember queuing up outside a record shop in Canberra where they had imported the second album, and I just couldn't wait to get my hands on it. And there was only one copy, and there were a load of people trying to get their hands on it. So no, Queen, I wouldn't say they were a sort of a formative influence, but I certainly went through my periods of.
Well, we're talking really about rock and roll. I think, what you liked. What I think is interesting, and I just want to put a little note on it, is at that time, people look back now and they're like, I love Queen or I love David Bowie. But people forget at that time, when they were doing these different albums, these albums were not all being hit out into the park. David Bowie, Lodger, and doing the Berlin stuff. People liked it, but it was not busting the charts.
Yeah.
The early Queen stuff was not cracking it. People, so if you liked them at that time, you liked something very special. It wasn't because they were popular. You liked them because you liked the fact that every album was different, even if it was a technical flop in the world of album sales, but not as far as being a fan of music.
it's hard to remember now how unpopular Low was. Low
Yes,
got terrible. Low got
yes,
the worst reviews. All these so-called big critics. I remember Charles Shaar Murray. I was very influenced by what I read. All my all my music magazines. You New Musical Express, a Melody Maker, and in America, Cream and
yep.
Rock Scene, and all these. And I read Charles Shaar Murray said, if Bowie's going to make music like this, maybe him and Eno should just exchange tapes in the post and leave it, the rest of us out of it. Um, yes, and Queen, unlike when you see their movie where they sort of just suddenly
Go to the
they
top,
had
right?
like yeah, there was like 3 albums before that
Yeah,
really happened.
yeah. They
Um,
barely made it. They barely made it before they got dropped. I mean, that's the whole thing. Nowadays, they would have made it. You don't get 3 albums to make it. You would get one. A lot of the bands, actually, any of these bands back then would not have made it. You know, it took 3 or 4 albums before they broke, and then then everyone went back to the other ones, and they went platinum or whatever you want to say. Like, it's like they came back and the fans went back about the old ones, but those were not platinum albums at the beginning. They were very small. It was
the
a niche
whole
crowd. You know,
the whole way it works now is so different. Um, you know, it's not even about albums anymore. I It's only us
right?
old fellows who are even talking and thinking about albums, and
I got
most
tons.
people are
I got
just
tons of them. I love them.
yeah. It was a great moment in music where because of the 40-minute limit that you could have on 20 minutes per side. I think 40 minutes was just the LP record accidentally fell into a great. I think 40 minutes is a great listening. It's a great um,
I think it's
attention
easier.
span.
I think it's
Yeah,
easier for bands to hit that attainable mark of having 40 minutes of good music. 60 minutes for
I
some
agree.
bands was stretching it. Some people could
Well,
do it. Some bands could do it, but not everyone. Most bands at 40, you could hit that mark. It was a lower mark.
yeah, yeah. Um, we found out, I think, when it was possible to put more music when in the dawn of the CDs,
Mm-hmm.
it seemed to me, oh, the more music you put on there, the more people will like it. But I found that not to be the case, and I found that you could give them too much and
Yeah.
exhaust their attention span. So 40 minutes is a really good sort of
Time.
length to ask for someone's attention.
How have you been able to find a balance? Because obviously, in the hit story, once you guys did Starfish, and then Under the Milky Way and Reptile, and then other songs you've had, later on Metropolis, you've had a bunch of hit singles. How have you been able to come to terms with that and still do your new stuff? Because you have a lot of new material constantly going through the years. You didn't stop at that period. How do you
Well,
keep it fresh?
it's funny. It's funny. I just read a guy. I was looking at a church fan page today on Facebook while I was waiting for this interview to start, and someone's put up a picture of Payday, and one guy's written, "They will never do anything as great as this again." Like he already knows he should be betting on horses and predicting the future. He knows that we will never do anything as good as that again. And it's that whole cliche of people. "Oh, I like your old stuff better," um, and people already know that your new stuff ain't going to be as good as your old stuff. And everybody's sort of up against that. Paul McCartney and Neil Young and whoever the hell it is. People tend to want their old stuff.
Which is a
So
shame.
I'm
There's so much good stuff
well.
out there.
I guess it is if your new stuff does happen to be as good as your old stuff. It's a shame that it's not going to be greeted with the same open
Right.
mindedness.
Well,
But
I can. I'm sorry. Speak.
no, I'm just saying, I think everybody's up against that. I don't think I'm the only one. I think there's most fans of most bands sort of like this golden period of stuff that they did. They don't
Yep.
necessarily like the new stuff so much.
Well, I'm going to say actually make 2 points. First off, the term one hit wonder makes me crazy because there's no such thing as a one hit wonder. Just because that song got popular does not mean everything else ceased to exist before and after that one song they did, you know, which is insane to me to think one thing somebody did is all they're known for. That being said, a lot of people find these songs, they're emotionally connected to it. It's usually in high school. So usually when they find you can't do better than, you check the age of the person. It was a moment in time where they were like, they had all these good memories and they attached their memories to your music. So 40
I
years
totally
later,
agree.
20 years later, now you're doing a different job and you're not a carefree teenager and you hear a song, you're not in the same mindset. You're not that same person. So you're gonna take it and absorb the music differently if you're a curmudgeon and not really, being that same open-minded teenager. If you've already been affected by the world, you're not that same person. Most people, I still like new music, but a lot of people just like that's why they don't go on. They can't go past it. They want to go back and relive it instead of just enjoying. Well, those were some fun old songs and then some new songs. Like I like the mixture, but they like the old stuff. That's what That's why the retro is big because it brings back to their old days. The carefree mind. It's emotional, and you can't
I
beat that. You
totally
can't do
agree.
that. You know.
Totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. You make a connection with someone when they're 16, and this was a song they lost their virginity to, or whatever the hell it is, and then you can't ever compete with that in the cold light of day
No,
40 years later.
no. But as a
And I
songwriter, if you
accept that.
yeah, as a songwriter, if you at least
Well,
make the connection once, that's pretty awesome too, because
oh,
it helps keep your
totally.
career going
Oh,
too.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, totally. Once upon a time, I would have been, if someone said you can make this connection once and that'll be it, I would have jumped at that.
Right.
Um, but having made the connection once, you long to make the connection over and over and over.
It's like an
But
addiction.
very few people really ever can pull that off.
Right. But I mean, you guys had some strong songs though afterwards too. It's just the market, and I think it's funny. It's not like you guys changed a lot. Think about it. The '90s, even as you guys were evolving, and you had some internal band stuff, and you had your own struggles. Grunge came, and then early before grunge and metal, there was disco. Like, there's always a change of the guards every what I think 8 to 12 years, maybe 10 years is a sweet spot if you really look at the history of popular music. You know what I mean? And it'll be gone again. So the bands are still around, are the top of their game, whether it's a rock, whether it's you guys, because to me, you guys are like psychedelic dream rock. Like, you guys are all to stay consistent through all the good and bad times. You have a strong fan base, and being prolific is amazing. But in fact, you guys are still writing songs and strong albums.
Yeah. Well, one hopes so.
Well, I've liked everything you've done so far. Pressure's on you now for this next one, number 26. What's
Yeah,
going on with it? Let's
I
talk
know.
about it a little bit.
Okay.
Let's promote it.
Well, we began it in 2019 with our new lineup, which is me and Tim Poles, who's been with us for a long time now.
Mhm.
Ian Hogue on guitar. He's been with us 10 years now. He joined in 2013. And Jeffrey Kane, who was once the songwriter and guiding light for a band called Remy Zero, he joined the band. And we also got another guitarist, Ashley Naylor, who's a guy from Melbourne who's he's a sort of a guitarist de jour. If you're putting a band together and want to get
Yeah,
one of the best, most accomplished guitarists,
yeah, he's
you
the
get
man.
Ash Naylor. Yeah, yeah. So with this new lineup, we started this record, and then there were a series of disasters. Australia nearly burnt to the ground, as you remember, back in 2020.
Yep.
It was a very doomy sort of feeling in the air with what happened here with the bushfires, and like we were losing like a million animals a day and
That's
entire
heartbreaking. Heartbreaking.
it's real heartbreaking. And then of course COVID hit and everything slowed right down. um Eventually last year the album seemed to be not going anywhere, and I jumped in and I sort of took over, and um I sort of with my just sheer willpower, I got it finished. We're still, even now, we're still doing our last minute tweaks and adjustments.
What are we looking at for a release? What are you looking at, you think?
Well, unfortunately, it's now going to be March 2023, but we have a new single. Well, single, I use that term loosely. We have a track that's like 6.5 minutes long, with a video coming out, which will be a taster from the album.
Yeah.
That's coming out within the next few weeks.
Oh, excellent.
And then we'll have, you know, as they say, we'll drop tracks. I really don't
Yeah.
like that. It sounds like a rabbit droppings.
Yeah.
We will drop some tracks until next year, where the whole damn thing comes out.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And you guys are touring right now, right? You guys are doing a mixture.
We're about to do a tour of Australia. Just one night in each city.
That's very cool. That's very cool. I want to thank you. Just one thing I actually want to talk about real quickly, though. And it's always kind of, it's another thing that bothers me, just like the one hit wonder thing, it always bothers me. When a band, at your point, you are the captain of the ship, you've changed members. People fall in love once again with the original members, and then the band goes on. They get a lot of garbage from other fans, like, it's not the same band. I didn't like that. How have you gotten a lot of slack?
Yes.
Have
yes.
you?
Yes.
I mean, to me, it's like, I like to say, I'm sorry, but to me, it's like you meet a family and a husband and wife, and they're married, but then they get divorced and you get remarried again, and then it's like saying, well, I liked your original family, I can't like you now, because it's a new person, a new dimension, because the mom and dad didn't work out. You know what I mean? It's unfair.
Well, I always remind them that these guys did.
Yeah.
Stop work. I was one that Peter, who left in 2019.
Yeah.
He did almost 40 years in this band. Marty did 30 years. And they'd had enough. For whatever reason, personal reasons, musical reasons, geographical reasons, they'd had enough, and they didn't want to play anymore, and they wanted to leave. And I'm faced with the option of not carrying on, but there's this huge body of work that I mostly wrote that is most
right.
Well, all of the words are mine, and a lot of the music is completely mine, or the rest of the music is music that I had a lot to do with. And I didn't see why I should stop, why the band should stop just because individual members left. And so I recruited new members who were fans of the band. So the new guys were all 15 years younger than me, they're in their early 50s and stuff. But they were fans of the band. They wanted to play this music, and they also wanted sort of building on this legacies, of stupid word really, for rock and roll. It's like it's crazy to think of rock and roll in terms of legacies and things like that. But this huge body of work, I wanted to go on being able to play it and exploit it and use it. And I didn't feel like with any of those people leaving, that meant I couldn't do it. But I do cop a lot of flack. You know, people go, it's just the Kilbey band. You know, I miss Marty. No matter what no matter.
Well, then you can write him a letter. Write Marty a letter, but that's not the band right now.
I miss Peter. No Peter, no Marty, no church. There's this sort of thing gets said over and over and over. I think they just exist. They have no intention of ever seeing us again or coming to listen to our records, but they exist to sort of haunt the church pages and say this same old thing they always said. I imagine, I haven't looked into it that closely, but I imagine it's like that for other bands as well.
It is, and that's why I was bringing it up, because to me it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Okay. To me, it is for every band. To me, it doesn't matter. Like, you know, as I'm saying for your side, like for musicians, that it doesn't matter that you change people, whether it's a legal reason or somebody retires or somebody's sick. It doesn't matter if the band keeps going. If somebody doesn't like as a fan, you can just stop listening.
Well, this is what happens. They go. One guy wrote to me and went, "You can't carry on with the band. You're just a voice and a bass guitar." And it seems logical that if you have a band that is with two guitarists that are making up the sound of the band, that's what people like, that if those guys leave, how can the bass player have the gall to carry on? But what they don't realize is that I created, and I always did, and that's what I do more than anything else. I create the situations for the guitarists to do their thing in.
Yep.
I I I set up the circumstances for them to be able to do their thing, and they wouldn't have done those things if that they did if I hadn't created the circumstances for them to do it. If you go and listen to what records those guys are doing now, I'm sure it doesn't sound anything like the Church. So it's very simplistic to go, how can you keep going? You're just a bass player and a singer. But you look at Phil Lynott, you know, in Thin Lizzy, he had the guitarist and they were the thing. And then when those guitarists dropped out, he kept on going because it was his band, it was his name. He did write the songs.
Well,
he was
yeah. Especially if you're the voice, it's even easier for you. You know, you are the voice, so you can replicate guitars, you can replicate the drums. You know, I mean, it's hard with a purist you can see, but a voice you can't always copy a voice. So the fact that you were the singer and the songwriter is the strongest lead point of the music, anyhow. Most people aren't going to catch that. Even Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull still gets garbage. It's not Jethro Tull, because he doesn't have Martin. I mean, so like it's nobody ever gets a break from not having the same people all the time.
There you go. Right from the beginning, one of the guy who signed me up, he said, you should call this band Steve Kilbey and the Church, or you're asking for a load of trouble down the track. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to sort of look and feel like we were like the Beatles, that they were all contributing equally, but it wasn't like that. They did contribute, but they needed a sort of they needed a template that they couldn't figure it out how to have their own template and we wouldn't have got anything done if I hadn't been bold enough to sort of go, we're going to do this and we're going to do that and get the ball rolling. That's often the hardest thing when you're in a studio with a bunch of guys, and is to get the ball rolling, to get that first note played. And I've seen that. I see that with other musicians. They don't know how to get the ball rolling. And that was the one thing I was always very good at. When back in Canberra, when I started, I was just 19, all the bands were playing Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple. And I had the gall to write my own songs. And I had the gall to get my own ball rolling. And that's always what I do. What I'm kind of best at is giving other players, great guitarists. I could never play like them. I wouldn't even try to. But they need a context in which to play. And that's why, say, Mick Ronson was an amazing guitarist, but you took away David Bowie's context for him to play in, and he didn't do anything. He didn't know what to play. And that's what I do, and that's what I will always do. And I get great players, and I give them something to play that they wouldn't have done without me doing that.
Right. I agree. And I think that's the thing. I wish people, if you're truly a music fan, you just enjoy the music. You can have favorite periods, you can have favorite songs, but to expect everything to be the same or it's a different band. I mean, if it's all different members and it's not really the band anymore, that's different.
Don't you think
it's silly?
Don't you think that these fan websites and stuff, people are just wanting an argument.
I think so.
Like I have been a vegetarian my whole life. And for a while I went through a militant stage where I'd write stuff on my Facebook or my blog, about vegetarianism.
I have vegetarians in my family. I know how hard it is. We have to do separate meals in my house, so I know how I see it.
There you go.
It's a challenge.
But I found people just want to argue, and now that Marty and Peter have gone, it gives these same old people a chance to go, it's not the Church without Marty and Peter, just saying the same old thing. Well, those guys ain't ever coming back. They don't want to. they don't want to do it anymore. They had enough. But as you say, Ian Anderson's still copying it, you know, because he hasn't got Martin Barr in the band or whatever. It's
Totally.
like,
And he's had some great guitars. I mean, the last guitarist before he just got a new one in had been there for a great length of time too. And it's like fantastic. His name's escaping me, so forgive me for that. He was a great guitar player. He always puts good musicians around him, and it's
yeah,
his voice, it's his songwriting. It sounds like Ian Anderson. It's in the Jethro Tull and the, you know, let's be honest, the name Jethro Tull or the name The Church right now are well-known brands, and it's easier to fill a hall. The people are going to know the church, and from the distance, they won't even know who's in the band except for they'll know your voice. You know what I'm saying? So it is, you know, a sales point at this point. The brand, you know, that's why the church is. Why shouldn't you? It's your brand that you built up, but you invested the years of sweat and songwriting in. It's your brand.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's
Well, it makes them angry, and then they accuse me I'm just cashing in. He's just desperate for cash. But I don't. It's like
you should. Well, why can't you cash in? You wrote songs, you play music. That's your job. Do people go to work for free? Are these guys going to work for free every day? They're cashing in on their jobs.
That's why I always ask them, what do you do for a living? Don't you have to earn your living like everybody else?
Yeah.
Anyway, it seems like that's just going to be an ongoing thing every time the band does everything, every time we announce the tour.
I know. I just had to put my 10 cents in because I think it's unfair to the artist, and I had to put it out there to people that they need to stop.
Okay. Cool.
Respect to you and other artists that do it. You know, it's hard. You know, it's hard. Hey, I want to thank you for coming on tonight.
Okay, Sean. Okay.
This has been great. I'll let you know when it's out. I'll send you this stuff. Okay. Thank you, man.
Okay, mate.
Thanks for being on the show.
Bye.